I think we can get started. It's 11 a.m. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for spending your time with us. This is the session, Creating a Culture of Organizational Resilience. You have with me here my CISO peers from multiple companies. I will let them introduce in a minute. We are here to talk about resilience. This is a broad subject. I introduce first myself, Michael Oberlaender. I'm a global CISO for the company GoTo. I do cybersecurity since 30 years in multiple countries, multiple industries, and I'm excited to be here. We are here to really deep dive into the subject. I really appreciate my peers here. I go here from this side to the other. So with me here is Ali. Can you introduce yourself, please? How long, where are you working, and how long are you in that industry?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Michael. My name is Ali Qutob. I'm the CISO for Hain Celestial. We're a global food manufacturing company based out of New York. I am personally based out of Houston, and I have been in the security business for about 22 years now. Thank you.
Mario, please.
So my name is Mario Chiock. I worked for Schlumberger for a little over 40 years, and I actually built their cybersecurity program from the ground up since the late 90s. So I'm also very active in the Houston community. I've been working with organizations like ISSA, ISACA, and InfraGard. So if you want to join these organizations or you want to take a leadership position in any of them, please come talk to me.
And Ross, please.
Hi, I'm Ross Leo, and like my peers over here, I'm a CISO for a small medical device company in Clear Lake, right on the back doorstep of Johnson Space Center, called Galen Data. And I've been in this business a lot longer than I would care to admit. I've been in it since about 1980, just here in Houston. And my involvement is CISO for Galen. I teach various certification courses as one of my activities. And I'm just glad to be here.
And Doug, please.
Hi, everybody. My name is Doug Reinhart. I'm the Global Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Newfold Digital, based out of Jacksonville, Florida. Most people have no idea what that is, right? And so I have to explain it, right? If you host a website, we're the second largest internet hosting company on the planet next to GoDaddy. So when I say GoDaddy, everybody's like, oh yeah, I know who they are, right? We don't have Danica Patrick, we don't have any of that cool stuff, but we're the second largest competitor to them with a large global footprint of web hosting services all around the globe. So I run that security team and feel pretty fortunate to be here with this panel today.
Awesome. Thank you all for that introduction. So resiliency, this is a very broad subject, as you know, and we have to cover a lot of topics. So therefore, we may not be able to have everyone talking to every question, but we have a bunch of questions that we want to get addressed. So I have prepared them, and I will ask my fellow friends here. So it's about business continuity planning, disaster recovery, over business impact analysis, incident response plan and testing, business process analysis, budgets, like think about HA solutions versus cost savings like cheap and fast and easy. It's about culture, it's about training, it's about communications and proactiveness, it's about governance and organizational change management, not ITIL, but organizational change management, right? And onboarding to offboarding, the whole process, and also touches defense in depth as well as security by design. So, Mario, what were your lessons learned on what to do or not to do for business impact analysis? And how does that help you prepare for your business continuity planning and disaster recoverability?
So business impact analysis is one of those things that I have tried in the past to do one for the whole business, and that is very, very difficult. And so one of the things that I have done is break it down into smaller pieces and have each of the business units do their own business impact analysis. At the end of the day, I also help my technical team to understand that we are there for the business, and we're not there to shut down the business, but to help the business be more productive. The other thing that we have learned is that you need to do drills and real exercise. You need to make sure that you enable your disaster recovery and actually test it with real data, not just with test data, because the results could be slightly different if you don't. And then the last thing that I learned is that you need to educate executives to be part of a tabletop exercise.
Yes, agree. Thank you. Okay, then my next question is for Doug. How is your company leveraging cloud as part of your technology and application resiliency plans?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, that's the buzzword today, right, is everybody's going to the cloud. And I think my organization uniquely has not adopted a cloud-first approach, right? When you're hosting millions of customer websites, scaling resources in the cloud at that level becomes a bit more of a challenge, right? The cost model may not work for what you're actually selling the hosting package for. So the consideration is part of the whole, and that's the way we've approached it, right? So cloud is part of the whole solution. So when we merged with our most recent acquisition, we took on 25 major data centers across the globe. Now, that's a lot of infrastructure footprint, right? And so part of that was a consolidation effort to get there. But as that consolidation, we started leveraging, data moving to the cloud, putting it in storage, right? Being able to run infrastructure as code in the need of a business unit failure, a geographical failure, or some other model that we needed to exercise or spin up a set of resources very quickly and then potentially tear them down and or scale them at a level that we could sustain for a period of time. And then, do that in a way that we could actually, measure it, but then also understand that we can keep the data. And we were talking about this earlier about data synchronization. And the challenges in a DR scenario, being able to keep your billing systems in line, right? How are you intaking, new sales? How are you doing all those things and ensuring that it actually lines up and works the way your business anticipates it? Because they just assume that the magic behind the scenes, that it's just all going to work. Right, and I think it goes back to what you were saying, Mario, around testing. Right, you have to be able to verify that you can do that. So, for us, it's been part of the whole. Right, it hasn't been the end all be all. So I'd be interested to see kind of where everybody else, kind of sits in that. But that's what my company approach has been.
Great, thank you for that. Then Ross, can you chime in here as well? What is your take how to address business continuity planning and the costly investments? Right, are you leveraging, for example, cyber insurance? Do you think this is actually worth it? Is the money well spent? What's your take there?
Well, we have a similar approach in that we oriented towards the business and its priorities. We have broken down, to Mario's example, we've broken it down where the business units do their own business impact analysis, and then we do a consolidation so that we have a sense of the individual units to prioritize them in the way that we need to bring them back online. But we also have to have the sense of what the business as a whole is going to do. Fortunately, my company, Galen Data, is a relatively small company right now, so it's easy. But when you get to something like Doug does, it gets to be a little bit more complicated. Sort of like trying to finish the railroad while you're still driving the engine. But we use the logic of starting with the people, making sure they're trained. Again, as Mario points out, that's a lot of where the weak points are. Emphasizing that a disaster of any kind is going to impact the business. And part of what we do is we emphasize that, well, you may not want to do disaster recovery because people treat it like it's buying insurance. And as the insurance salesmen will tell you, insurance is never bought, it's only sold. Because nobody goes out, wakes up one morning and says, I think I'm going to go buy an insurance policy today. I don't think I've ever had that thought. But you have to consider that as part of your total strategy. But you have to educate people that this is the kind of thing you have to do because the losses are going to far outweigh the cost of your program. You're not making any revenue if you're down. So you may not like the idea of having a plan because it costs money, sits on the shelf for a long period of time. But when you need it, there is no replacement for it. And if you need it and don't have one, there's no way to get one. So convincing them of the business case for doing this kind of thing, I find is a great way to start because it really paints a realistic picture for them of exactly how costly it's going to be to the point of even threatening the existence of your organization. But you have to sell them on that idea by first selling them that you grasp the business part and that you understand the impact that that's going to have and how costly losing it will be. Then it's funny, they seem to kind of light up their eyes and they get the sense of what, maybe this really is that important. So I find that that's a very important and positive way to get started because it gets their buy-in, it gets their understanding, but it also helps them understand that you're focused on the importance of the business as a business like them, instead of being what they often perceive as to be the geek or the nerd. somebody who likes to fly a keyboard. We have to be, at this level, being a CISO, we have to be conscious of the business itself, not just the technology. But they've got to have a sense of that. And so that's where I find the communication is extremely important.
Great question, a great answer. And I would like to also share that, in my view, insurance is absolutely necessary as an addition, but don't think that insurance solves the problem, because after the breach, you still have to do the work. So keep that in mind. The insurance is just helping you pay the bill for it. Great answers here. All right, let me check next thing. Doug, on your side, what's your take about cyber insurance? Is that from your as well? Seen on the same page, or are you from a different perspective?
I was just shaking my head here listening to you talk about it, because I think that's really the case, right? I don't know how many of you guys have actually gone through that cycle recently. I know I have. And if you felt the demand signal change from insurance? So a few years ago, I was sitting down with my risk officer, and we were talking about a strategic decision and you know, an investment that needed to happen. And his answer was, well, if something ever happens as a result, we'll write that off on insurance. Right, that was his answer to the problem. Now that's it. Okay, listen, the business said that that's what they wanted to do. That's fine, right? But you think about it today, and that's when the market was wide open. There was tons of opportunity in cyber insurance, right? You could get a policy with not much challenge and response. But what is it today? Right, the demand signal has changed. Right, they want to see comprehensive control stacks. They don't want to pay you. Right, they want to make the money, but they don't want to pay you. Right, so the demand signal is high for that validation. Right, so as part of your company strategy, your IT strategy, your security strategy, your risk strategy, you have to think about that. Right, if we've even had conversations at my company, and I don't know how many of you are having those conversations around, do we self-fund? Right, because the demand is so high, right? I mean, how many of you walked around and talked to vendors today, right? Many of you did, right? What I found interesting is that if you go down that checklist for your cyber insurance, they're asking you what products you're using for endpoint protection or XDR or those kind of things. Why do you think they're asking that? Because they get reports from these vendors to see that your actual endpoint agents are healthy and alive, and they're checking in and they're doing their job, right? They're actually going behind you and validating. How many are out there scanning your perimeter, looking for vulnerabilities and holes, right? So they don't have to take on that extra risk, right? So you have to be conscious when you're building your cyber roadmaps, when you're building your plans, to know that that's going to have an impact. And you just can't start planning for it during insurance season, right? When it's time to renew, right? You've got to get in front of that, and it's got to be a conversation you have at many different levels in your organization. When you're moving teams to take care of things from a server hygiene perspective, or you're talking to leadership about your next strategic investment, or how these challenges actually present themselves to the company as a whole. So again, I think it's really a unique place right now for insurance.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, what I heard from the three gentlemen to the right is about also a challenge in the culture. So Ali, for you, the most challenging question probably here is, I'd like to get your perspective on how to change the culture of an organization towards being proactive, plan for resiliency, and execute the governance. I know this is a tough question, but please.
No, it honestly is a very interesting question to me, and one that I deal with on a fairly regular basis. So. Every organization that we're in as security professionals, we always feel like we're the only people that realize how bad things are, and we're trying to convince everybody. We feel like we're screaming every day, telling them, guys, it's real bad. We need to do something about this. The key is cultural change. What you want to focus on is educating, informing your users about what's going on. Now, what I have been doing for a few years now is that I'm the guy that actually writes the security bulletin that we put out every couple of months. And I put a lot of information in there. I'd like to put pictures, and my guys are like, Ali, you're just getting, enjoying yourself. You're getting creative. I'm like, guys, this is the primary way in which we are going to get these people, our users, to understand what we're dealing with. So what I do there is that through the security bulletin, I tell our users about the latest stuff that's going on. Whenever the war in Ukraine started, I put something out. I'm like, guys, those Russians, they're attacking Ukraine, and they're attacking everybody too at the same time, because a lot of those kinds of attacks are not isolated to a particular geo. So I told the users about what's going on there, and I connected it with the war in Ukraine, and it's like, oh, it clicked for them. It's like, oh, this is affecting us. Okay, glad the security team is on it. And all those kinds of opportunities, I'll tell you, you got to look for the opportunities and inform your users about what's going on. Let them know that cybersecurity is a real issue, that there is somebody working on it. Things are not working well just because we're lucky. No, there are people behind the scenes working on it, and that you need each and every one of them to help you get it done, because IT security, cybersecurity teams cannot accomplish it without their help. So it is a continuous process, that cultural change. Educate your users. Of course, I also like to do a lot of the phishing simulations, the security awareness training. Those are different activities. The security bulletin, I'll tell you guys, if you're not doing it already, I highly, highly recommend it. It doesn't have to be too long. Usually it's like just one email that's maybe 1 or 2 pages long. Don't get too in-depth. Don't get too technical. Use lots of pictures. Users love the pictures. And get it out there. Trust me, you'll always find topics to share with the users. We in the cybersecurity world have plenty of news to share with the users. So use that opportunity. Log4j, oh my God, I can't tell you how great it was for me to see the Log4j thing, because I'm like, guys, here's the CNN news about Log4j, and let me tell you how that's affecting us as a company. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. We leveraged that as well. Same situation. Wonderful Christmas time. So you have not answered one point, and I just want to call that one about governance. So the reason why I ask about the culture change, it's very tough to do so. But then when you do governance, have you set up some sort of governance board or steering board or anything of that nature to then tell the organization, this is not the way how you should do it. Here's a better way to do it in a secure way, something like that. Absolutely,
absolutely. So I started with the company that I'm currently with, Hain Celestial, a couple of years ago. And honestly, whenever I first started, it's a good company. They're running things well, but cybersecurity-wise, maturity was very, very low. And they had actually just done an assessment right before I started. And the folks that did the assessment are like, guys, you need help. There's a lot of opportunity here. Everything from governance to endpoint security, you name it, they needed a lot of help. So one of the basic things that I started whenever I got there is a cybersecurity governance board. And essentially the people that we have on there are our general counsel, CFO, COO, all of our top executives. The CEO, we put him down as optional. We're like, hey, you don't need to worry about it. We got this covered. And what we did there is that every quarter, we get together, we let them know about the latest and greatest things that are going on, what our biggest issues are, and let them know what the IT security team is doing in order to close those gaps, and where each of their departments need to contribute in order for us to get that stuff moved forward. Of course, with all of that, one of the other things my team did is immediately start writing up policies. We didn't even have a formal corporate security policy. So boom, we started chugging those out as quickly as possible, getting the general counsel to approve them and distribute them out to our users. So absolutely, all of those things are absolutely needed, and you gotta do them. I know to a lot of us security guys, it's like, oh man, I don't want to deal with that crap. Everything from the documentation, the policies, and getting stuff out there. Trust me, that is the biggest, what do you call it? Bang for your buck, is to make sure to get to the top level people, educate them, inform them, let them know what you guys are doing, give them a priority list. That's something else that I just finished doing back in June very, very well. And that is, I went to them and I'm like, guys, I need, in order to get all of my stuff done, I need about $3 million this year. Here are all the priority items, and here is what each one translates into. You tell me which one you don't want me to do and how much you're willing to fund us. And I really put the whole thing in their hands. We actually sat down and I walked them through each one of them. And at the end of the day, I got all the money I asked for. Even though everybody else was cost cutting, I got all the money I asked for because of that process that I took them through. And it's very important to have this tandem play, right? So that you do on one side the culture education, and then the other side basically get the governance and the policies and all that stuff in place, so it all ties together. So Russ, next question is for you then, and basically based on what Ali just shared, can you give your share from your organization, how about to engage the board to define the risk appetite or risk tolerance level, whatever you want to call it, and then get the funding to keep it at that level of defined risk?
Considering that the company that I work for, I report directly to the CEO, that's first an advantage. Because seeing as how he and I both share some background, we both worked at NASA at the same time for a period of time. He was very conscious of security there, probably because I and my crew beat it into everybody. But having him attuned to security's importance, but balancing it with the business need, was a good starting point. So I feel like I have a very good advantage there. I don't have to convince him of the importance. However, taking it to the next level and talking to the board, that's a different story altogether, because what they want is they want to see sales, they want to see revenue, they want to see growth, because they're invested. This part of the program is to convince them that this is going to be a differentiator for us. So we have to do a lot of the things that Ali was just talking about to show them that these things are setting us apart from our competition. We recently did a high trust. We got that certified, and I was very glad to see what I told them. This is a differentiator, cybersecurity is, that is. Seeing that validated, because as soon as we were able to announce that we'd achieved that, that closed 6 deals for us almost the same week. Because it told everybody that we were serious about this. Because a lot of what I found by talking to the board members was, God, what's going to happen if we have a breach? Because breaches are very expensive. $4 million, $6 million, depending upon how big it is. This worries them. This keeps them up at night. Now that we've done this, they think that they can relax a little bit. But the next meeting, after we had done that, I was able to tell them with complete confidence, by the way, that establishes the starting point of our program, because all that says is we've got the structure in place, we've got all these things. This is not the be-all and end-all. And I got those deer-in-the-headlight looks. What do you mean? We're certified. We're secure. No, we have a solid foundation on which to get secure. So it's been, very much to his point, it's very much a case of being interactive with them, engaging them in the process, having them understand that there is a real business value to doing this. When we get inquiries from prospects or customers, the first thing that they do is they say, here's our third-party risk management survey. Please fill this out. Well, now that I've done high trust, I find I don't have to do that quite so often. But these things are very extensive. The due diligence that you talked about, the due diligence that Mario talked about, this is almost mandatory. And I never get away from having to do about a 500-question questionnaire every time we have a prospect. High trust will answer some of them. It doesn't answer them all, because that particular prospect has got all of its own concerns. So I find that the conversation I have with the board, with the CEO, with my governance panel, which contains the CEO, the CTO, and the CIO, and me, we talk about this stuff just about every month so that we know that it's going on. The CEO is up at night because he's worried about breaches, because the board is. Well, that's natural. So we do the things that make them confident, but we show them that we're really doing them. So we have regular reporting, capturing metrics. Then when it comes to the customers, we're doing the same thing with them. And it does turn out to be a very real business differentiator, because when they talk to us and they share what they've encountered with our competition, other medical device companies, they go, what the heck are these guys doing? Why aren't they doing what you're doing? And of course, I shrug and I say, I have no idea, but they certainly should be. And they kind of go, yeah, they really should be, shouldn't they? Well, anyway, and then we get off that subject and we start talking about our relationship with them. And that's when they whip out the 500-question survey, say, okay, fill out the rest of this for us so we can see the rest of the picture. And cyber insurance is frequently one of those questions now. So we're seeing it come full circle, but everybody is getting on board because of the communication, because of the training, because of the awareness. They see that it really makes a big difference in business, because now what you claim is something that you can prove, but you have to prove it every day. So we get them on board, we raise the culture, but then we still have to have the rubber meet the road and prove that we're actually talking about what we do and doing what we say we're doing. Unlike in the past, other places I've been, we talked about a lot, but we didn't do it always. We didn't do it nearly as much as we talked about doing it. Now we do it, and we talk about it both. And that's really how we raise the culture and are successful in the program.
Great, thank you. So, Doug, your business is growing through mergers and acquisitions, right? So, how has your company addressing business and IT resiliency concerns, and any other feedback from your side on the board communication?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's crazy that we just announced this week, yesterday, in fact, we just bought another company. So that is in fact how we grow, and it has been a challenge, just to say the least. We bought multiple business units across the globe in different geolocations where they just sit out there and they hang out for a year. They might hang out for a little longer than that. I've been at this company a little over 2 years now, and we have a business unit that is just now starting to get integrated. And you start thinking about resiliency, right? Resiliency of that infrastructure, resiliency of that brand, resiliency of how they, how do they sustain, an outage or an impact, right? And it's been a big challenge for us. I think one of the things that we've tried to do is really get into place monitoring and controls that give us an idea what's going on in those environments, right? Because not all M&A actions are the same. And I think, anyone that's ever gone through those understand the large ones, the small ones, they all present a challenge, right? There's a different tech stack. There's a different philosophy at the corporate level. There's a different model, right, of how you handle things like incident and problem and change and those kind of things, right? Which pose, very unique challenges when you're defining what a resiliency plan looks like and how fast you can recover from an incident or an outage, right? And you start going through that monitoring where you're looking at the performance of those companies, you're looking at their intake processes for change, how are they putting validation around that, how are they monitoring their performance of their infrastructure and so on, and how are they responding to it. Then you can start working yourselves into a unified model. And I think that's where we've seen a lot of that actually happen is we start taking the enterprise model and we apply it to those units, right? So we start streamlining how we do things that create, resiliency concerns, right? Initially from the operational perspective. Then you've got that whole other problem of what happens if you have a catastrophic failure, right? How do you get those resources, restored very quickly, which has been a challenge. I think what we're trying to do now is we are working on the latest merger that we had was so large with those 25 data centers that I mentioned that we took an opportunity to re-architect our entire network, right? We built high availability zones where they never existed before. We were able to start implementing controls that gave us the ability to handle an outage, handle a large denial of service attack, or maybe a carrier outage, or when Microsoft has a bad day, or we're a large Cloudflare provider, right, or a Cloudflare consumer. When Cloudflare has a bad day, right, our ability to have a portion of our business impacted versus the entire entity, right, the entire enterprise affected. So we've tried to apply those types of those thoughts and layer that into a way that we can still sustain operations and keep the business moving. From a security perspective, when I first got to this company, everything was on-prem, everything was server-based, and we had a DR facility, in another location. And my, immediate ask was, well, how do we replicate logging and monitoring if we fail over? And everybody said, well, we don't. I'm like, well, then what are we doing wrong? Right? I mean, how does security go with the business? And I think that was a eye-opening for me because my initial strategy when I first came into this company was I was telling the gentleman here, we had an e-com platform that got hacked every 18 months. And I got called in to fix that, right? That was my focus. Well, then when I got in and started looking at it and I realized that I have no way to scale with the business and all we do is buy companies, I've got to change my model. My security model's got to change. How do I get higher availability of my security products, right? How do I get in place where the business moves very fast? How do I move as fast as they do, right, and still be able to provide a service for them? So that's some of the ways that we've looked at doing those things.
Great, awesome. I just want to give the audience a heads up. I will ask you in a few minutes for your questions, but before, so you can already start preparing. But the next question is for Mario. So when I personally think about proactive resiliency, to my mind comes areas like defense in depth or security/resiliency by design. Would you agree? And what are your lessons learned how to do that?
So I totally agree that you need to do defense in depth because when something goes bad, it's going to go sometime. And you just need to make sure that you minimize the impact to the business, right? So defense in depth needs to be done from the very beginning. We develop software, so we need to make sure that you have that from the very beginning. You test all your software. Now with the cloud and SaaS application, you need to test them. And you need to do, I was one of those persons that went to Microsoft and said, look, we need to do a joint drill. Say, what? Why do we need that? Well, you need that because when you have an incident in the cloud, you need to make sure you have all your process in places to minimize the downtime, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. All right, to the audience, do we have anyone having a question? Please chime in. No pressure. Okay, we have one.
Isn't the question, how does everybody get Ali's budget? I think that's, everybody's going to come to your company.
So I don't think it's much of a question, but I really like the two answers that you guys gave, Gus and Ali. When it comes down to IT approaching to the business and selling the idea, telling them actually what's happening, how is that going to affect the company, how do we fix it? Because business doesn't understand the IT speech, right? So we have to be able to get it to a level that they understand, because I've been on both ends. I've been into the business, I've been to IT, ended up with the internal audit and compliance. So it's very crucial to have CISO and CIO that understand that bridge and have people in place that can actually bridge the gap between the business and IT. I think that will help a lot. Selling your ideas to the business, specifically when it comes down to the budgeting, right? When you have an idea, you can't just go and say, hey, I'm going to do this. Someone has to pay for that, right? So having those type of people in place actually within the companies means a lot.
Thank you for the comment. Any other questions?
Thank you. This also goes to the awareness. I think it was Gus and Ali. You mentioned that when you are budgeting or when you're working with policies, you break it up to each department, to each business unit, and have them do some of the work and some of the heavy lifting. What kind of education? Because we mentioned in the previous question that you have to translate everything over into corporate or into executive language so they can understand it, they can understand the impact. How much of that translation is happening with you directly once you're absorbing the information, or is there some kind of training in process with your upper management, your floor guys, to let them know, hey, this is the information I want? Do you do it via paperwork, or do you just have a sit down with them? Where does that translation happen?
You want me to go?
Thank you.
Okay.
Who takes it? Ali?
So I'm not sure if I understood the question completely, but let me give it a shot. So one of the key things that, and this is really more of a tip for all cybersecurity professionals, we are good at security. Yeah, relatively. I think most of us are more comfortable than the rest of the public when it comes to cybersecurity. Where many of us don't do a good job is understanding the business. And I'm talking understanding it in depth. For instance, one of the things that I've been continuously working on is understanding all the logistics that go on with how the business runs. What are the third-party vendors that we're dependent on for each piece of the supply chain? Who are our third-party vendors? How do we do all of our accounting? How do we figure out how much to ship, how much to store, how much to do all of these things? I have invested a tremendous amount of time in understanding our business inside out. And what that has done for me is that whenever I'm having those sessions with the different departments, I'm actually able to speak their language. I'm not talking techie stuff. I'm not just talking about cybersecurity terms. No, I'm speaking their language and I'm explaining to them risk management in terms that they can understand. I'm talking to them about, interruption to their ability to ship, or if a truck doesn't leave on certain day of the month, which, those are some of the things they're thinking about, or our accounting department, when I talk to them about their month-end closing items, that they're like, oh, this guy knows what we're working on, and he actually does understand it. He's not just trying to sell something. He's working to help us get what we do done. So that's something I highly, highly recommend. It has paid huge dividends for me. Understand your business inside out. Don't just be reading the security articles and staying up to date on the latest threat actors. Make sure you understand the company you're working for and the competition, that entire field, that entire market. Become a subject matter expert at it. That's going to help you tremendously. One last quick tip. Guys, get good at presentations. You gotta be very good public speakers That's one of the biggest things that's holding both cybersecurity people back and IT people back. I keep seeing it in a lot of those governance meetings. You know, somebody else wants to talk about their thing, and you can see it on the faces of the executive team. They've lost them because they're not presenting well. They're not able to form their message well. They don't do a good job at public speaking. Get trained at it. Literally, go take a class. If you don't think you can figure it out yourself, go take a class. Again, that is going to be huge. Your ability to present to executive and board level people is going to be key to your success as a cybersecurity professional.
100%. So you can observe them. In the moment that they pull out their cell phones or whatever toys they have, you lost them. So then you have to immediately stop what you're doing and basically recharge. I think there's more comments here. So Mario next, and then Ross. And
So I totally agree. One of the things that I think is really good to do is our IT people believe that every user or employee is the weakest link. And I worked very hard for a couple of years to convert the weakest link into our human sensors. And I can tell you that today, we stop a lot of potential major incidents just by analyzing things that the average user has reported, and that is by changing the culture, right? But definitely, I do agree that, and I actually, part of the development plan for my security team is to get a good communications training, because that pays off big time.
Ross, please.
Well, since you guys aren't standing up and flooding us with questions, I've got a question for all of you. How many of you work for the Department of No?
Glad to see no fingers.
If you are all cybersecurity people, that's the department that you work for, the Department of No. And by no, I mean NO. Early in my career, I learned that by walking into a meeting, listening to someone presenting what might be a very good idea, and my response being, no, I'm sorry, we can't do that. That's not secure. Oddly enough, what happened immediately following that was I would be invited to leave, and I would not be invited back. And
Another meeting, Ross. You can go ahead.
That's pretty much it. Or they would all break up, and the person leading the meeting would see me walk out the door, and he's going like this to everybody else to keep them in the room, while I walk out the door, which they slam and lock behind me. But the point I'm making is, as we've been emphasizing, the business is really important. So to your question, what I find is the most productive is I don't go in there to talk about the geek stuff. I don't go in there to talk about servers or network or this or that. I say, why am I here? How can I help you? Help me understand what your business problem is. And that's very much along the lines of the risk management stuff. It's very much along the lines of the communication. We can't overemphasize how important these things are. The message that you communicate, if it's about the geek stuff, and I don't mean to call it that in an insulting way, it's what we grew up with. It's what we work with all the time. We're very tempted because we think that that's going to help the person we're talking to understand what's important, all the bits and bytes. It isn't. They're concerned about the revenue. They're concerned about the accounting cycle. They're concerned about the trucks, in your case, being on time. There's an awful lot of information security that goes into all of that, maybe not quite visibly, but there is. I talk about the business problem. What is the problem on your mind? I was talking to Doug before the session started today. One of the reasons why I don't like to talk to certain people is because they want to talk about what they're trying to sell me. And this is not to be offensive to any vendors. I mean, that's the job that they have. Well, I have a little different job. I have to solve business problems. Listening is one of the most important things that you can do. When I talk to a business person, I'm there mostly in almost full receive mode. Tell me what you're troubled by. Tell me what your problem is. If I can't do anything for you, then I'll help you find somebody who can. But if I can do something for you, I first have to understand what's got you up at night, what's keeping you from being happy in your role, if you want to put it that way. But that's the only way we can solve these problems, because these are business problems. And early in my career, I learned that if I ever wanted to make any progress, I'd better figure that part out very quickly. And I find, talking to many of my peers and others, it is still a problem because the acceleration of business, how fast, what's the pace of years? They are probably buying some other company right now, and he'll find out about it when he's done with this, and they'll dump the problem in his lap and say, go solve it. And then they'll turn their backs on him, knowing that he's going to do something, flounder for a bit, and then solve the problem. But these are the things that don't sound like security skills. But think of it this way. Any message you want to communicate to the business people whose problems you are there to solve, if you can't get your message across first by understanding their problem and then working out a solution that is acceptable to security and to the business end, you're not communicating properly. Presentation skills are absolutely part of that. But knowing your audience, knowing what the problems are, knowing the business, like I said, we can't emphasize the importance of that enough. They're going to see you as an internal consultant and a trusted advisor. It's going to take time to build up to that. I know at NASA it took me forever, it seems, to be able to do that because the scientists and engineers out there always saw me more as an impediment. They have to see you as an ally, as a listening post, as a problem solver who first listens.
Great point. I need to speed up a little bit that we cover more points. So we will have another session for you guys to ask questions at the end of the session. Doug, for you, we live currently in the world of the cyber breach, right? It's the age of the cyber breach, so it happens literally every single day. If you think about your incident response trainings, exercises, is there any lesson that you can share that is generalizable, how to do that? And because I want to make it really palatable for them all, that they can take something home, what would be the 1-2 points, main points that you think is really helpful for others?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so in my organization today, right, and I was kind of waiting for the opportunity because there was so much great stuff here, right? We when I first got to my company, we were a security aware company, but we were a compliance focused company. It was all about compliance, right? And the rest of the business nobody cared about, right? If you weren't in the compliance lens. We shifted that model to a security focus. You can become a security focused company and still achieve compliance, right? The two don't always go hand in hand, right? And part of that model was shifting away to exactly what you're talking about, our incident response planning and the other focus points of our program was to really shift into a full focused security model. I see 250,000 malware alerts a day. That's a Tuesday for me, right? I host the world's internet. I host the garbage that's on the internet. Every bad actor has to have a place to host their ransomware. I can talk to you till I'm blue in the face about ransomware uploads, about ransomware gangs. We work very closely with the FBI and CISO. I exercise my incident response plan daily, hourly at sometimes, right? And I think that's the takeaway, right, is while we do it so frequently, every time we get in front of an auditor, well, do you do a tabletop? No, we just did one an hour ago. Let me tell you about how we do this, right? I have a full-time incident manager in my SOC, right? Because I have to, right? That's how much churn. I got 3 going on this week, all majors, right? So we exercise that incident response plan, and that's what I would tell you, right? Because you may not see 250,000 malware alerts a day. Maybe you see 2. Maybe you see 5, right? How do you respond to it? How do you tighten your time to respond? Right? What is your ability to see it? You can't fight what you can't see, right? So how do you advocate to your leadership around that visibility piece? Because you can do a lot with something you see. You can do a lot with something you know, right? But if I had the same risk officer who told me to just punt it to cyber insurance was the guy who often would say, well, if we didn't see it, we got plausible deniability, right? We don't want to monitor it, right? Because we can just say we didn't see it, we didn't know. I can tell you I had some really interesting conversations with that guy. We didn't really find ourselves on the same sheet of music most of the time, right? Because he was looking for a way to just kind of tuck it up. He would have been a terrible lawyer, but you get my point, right? That was the way that they looked at it. That's the way they looked at incident response. They looked at some of those resiliency plans to be able to minimize the amount of impact that a breach potentially could happen, right? So the sooner you get to it, the sooner you know that it's happening, the sooner you can take action and do something about it, right? And I can't overemphasize the need for playbooks because every single person in your company is an incident responder, right? And we talked about it here, right? How do you train that user who's on the call center, right? And that social engineer person is really good and they're social engineering their way into your systems. Okay, I have that happen about every 6 months. I know the guy's voice. I know all the sign up data because he does it to us so frequently. right? How do I train that person to be the incident responder that I can't be? Because they're on the phone and they're taking that intake from them and they're responding back to say, well, yeah, okay, you're from the IT and you want to download what software on my computer, right? And you want my MFA token, right? Literally, that happens. I can give you the guy's name if you guys want. We'll put him on a watch list here. But really, that's the kind of stuff that we see, right? And that's how you have to train them. You have to focus on that end user because they are your firewalls. They are your incident responders. They give you that insight to things that are happening, that give you the ability to exercise your playbooks. You can get in there and you can suitcase some of these things very quickly and minimize the impact to your business. It's when you don't know what's happening and it's running rampant in your network or your environment that it happens to you and you sit there and go, what happened? Right? That's the wrong time to be thinking about resiliency and incident response planning and those things is after the fact.
Yeah,
right? So just tabletop it. Think about it in terms of, what's sensitive to your business and if I really wanted to get in, where are those weak spots?
Great point. So important is really the incident response exercises, red team exercises, purple team exercises. We do them all quarters, right? All the time. Keep them current, keep the people really abreast of that. I want to level it a little bit higher. So incident response training or red team exercise and so forth is preparing for a particular area. However, if you look about this from a crisis management perspective, Mario, I want to ask you, we just have been through a major pandemic, but that was probably not in our previous plans. Yes, I have had that in the past. I had a small chapter, pandemics, but it was not really the main point that you were ready for. You have thought about hackers, you have thought about all other kind of attack, nation states and so forth. Has Schlumberger done anything else how you guys connect to the office? Have you changed something from a resiliency perspective?
So first of all, we do have a lot of playbooks for crisis management. And very luckily, there was not the COVID, but the few years before, we had another pandemic, and we did drill for it. Mm-hmm. However, that planning did not work necessarily as well for COVID. We did have some issues, specifically in certain countries where they have data residency, and you cannot use the large VPN concentrators. China is a very good example. People in China do have their own VPN just for China. During COVID, we had to, do a few things to make it work because we never planned to have all of China working out of their house, right? So, but in other large areas, there was no problem because we had large things. But I think crisis management is something that it needs to be done, and it needs to be done at a very high executive level. And I personally, I started crisis management like 10 years ago, and it's amazing how different people in the crisis management team, they want to get up and leave the room because it's supposed to be, if it's a cyber incident, they say it has nothing to do with me. And I many times had people in marketing or people in HR say, sit down because there is a problem. I'm going to give you a very good example on HR is what if our payroll system doesn't work and people need to get paid? How do you do it? That's part of crisis management, and HR need to do something about it. And thanks to one of the crisis management exercises, we were able to set up a plan where people on salary will still get paid and people hourly, they will get an average of whatever they made in the last 3 paychecks, right? So.
And have you changed the connectivity somehow, or were you already completely prepared, work from home and so forth?
No, the only connectivity we had to change was to scale up a couple of countries. At that time, we were working with Russia and China, and that one was scaled up a little bit. For the rest of the world, we had very large VPN concentrators that it took very small fine-tuning to make it work. I mean, one of the big changes was, I can't print because our VPN, it forces you to, a full tunnel. So people were complaining about not being able to print locally at home. So we changed the policy to do that. Yeah. But there were very minor things. Yeah.
Ross, how about you? Has Galen data changed the connectivity? Have you done any different remote from home? What's your take there?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not really a good example of that because Galen Data is 100% cloud native, and almost everybody works from home already, and that's how we've worked almost from our beginnings. So we didn't really have to do much of anything. However, what we did have to do was we had to figure out how to accommodate the change in our customers that come into our cloud, because we sometimes had to allow people from other than defined locations, in other words, they went from office to home for them. We changed what they had to do because of we had to adapt to what they were changing. But ours was, well, quite simple. You know, I live about 1.5 miles from my office. I almost never go to the office because I'm always working remotely through my cloud. So, like I say, we are built for resilience because we are cloud-based and don't really have a physical presence ourselves, but we had to accommodate all of our customers. So that did require us to do a few things along the lines that Mario described.
Awesome. So then, Ali, how is the Hain Celestial Group addressing security by design, defense in depth during the pandemic? Any lessons learned that you can share maybe on endpoint or network protection for resilience?
Sure. Sorry, Michael. I'm still kind of thinking about the question that you asked, Ross. We certainly did have a challenge whenever the pandemic hit, and the vast majority of our users were not remote back then. So I'm going to answer his question very, very quickly. The one thing I got to tell you all is the pandemic, COVID-19, is still fresh in everybody's minds. So for those of you that are thinking about business continuity planning, hit it while the iron is hot. It is still hot right now. You can use the word pandemic and it means something to everybody still. So if you're trying to move things forward in improving your business continuity planning, this is the time to do it. And what we had to do whenever that hit, because I'm sure many of you all remember this, there were no laptops, there were no cameras. Everything ran out right there at the beginning of the pandemic. Virtual desktop solutions became awesome, and yeah, we did have to upgrade some of our pipes, some of our systems, but fortunately, we were able to recover very, very quickly. All right, Michael, your question about defense in depth and such. Certainly, by now, the majority of our users are still remote. Yeah, some of them went back to the office. Some of them, many of them, are still remote. And as you can imagine, having such a large user community working from home has changed our entire risk posture. We have had in the last couple of years, and part of it was cyber insurance, and part of it was just improving our resiliency in general because of all the attacks that were happening all over the world. You know, everything from that SolarWinds incident to Ukraine and many, many others. We have deployed a lot better security on a multitude of levels. We have improved our monitoring drastically. That was something that was just a big, big hole for us. We honestly, a couple of years ago, I couldn't even tell you whether we were hacked or not. And I told my boss, hey, we may actually be hacked right now. I really don't know. We have no way to tell. Unless we put certain things in place, we will never know. So, yes, we have had to improve our visibility. We've actually contracted a third-party SOC to monitor 24/7 for us. That's made me sleep a little better at night, I got to tell you. You know, just a handful of things. Guys, network segmentation, it is absolutely critical. Make sure that you separate your critical stuff from your non-critical things. When I first started, any user anywhere, even our remote users, could get to any critical system we had anywhere in the world. It was just flabbergasting. We've changed all of that. Now only the right people can get to the right stuff. I mean, there's still room for improvement, but it's tremendously better than what it used to be. Michael, yeah. I apologize. I don't know if I answered the question.
You did. I appreciate that. And we are a little bit short on time, so I just want to give you the heads up. You have one more question in a minute. For the team here, have you thought about implementing MFA? I haven't heard that yet. MFA, EDR, EPP, stuff like that. Maybe a round robin here. Ali first, and then
MFA people and your cyber insurance providers, for those of you that are dealing with them, will tell you this. It is the #1 requirement now for email, remote access, and certainly for privileged accounts, MFA, period. And I'll tell you, don't do it for cyber insurance, do it for you. It is the #1 thing that causes threat actors to look for another target. It makes their life difficult. They don't want to have to bother with it. Yes, there are ways to get around it, but it is very, very difficult. It is an awesome deterrent.
Mario?
So I totally agree with MFA. I deployed MFA like 15 years ago, and but in the last 5 years, what I've been working on is actually get rid of username and password so completely. So passwordless is like something that is on my top of my list, and we've been doing a lot of work, especially with Microsoft, with where basically you use their authenticator as the username and password. And now I have the leadership is asking me to extend password change. So instead of changing it too often, those that are using passwordless, they will have to change their password less often. So.
Thank you. Ross?
We are in the process of implementing multi-factor, so we believe in that. I did read a disturbing article just earlier this week about how MFA is fishable. So to Mario's point, you can get around it. So you have to be very careful, but look at your security methods to make sure that they don't have any built-in vulnerabilities as well. But we are implementing it. We are implementing a program after that about extended disaster recovery and incident response, because those are the two big areas for us. But they also highlight the fact that along with that comes training and education so that everybody understands why these are being done, why they're important, and why we want to protect ourselves more, not to encumber their ability, but to make it safer for them. So we are doing a number of those things.
Okay, great. And Doug, please fast.
Okay, yes, and all the above.
Thank you. Okay, do we have a question in the audience? Any additional? Okay, we have two. Please, ma'am.
Okay. I want to find out, you were talking about that there are a checklist, like for cyber security, that type thing. Can you tell us where we may be able to find one, a checklist for cyber?
Can you share a checklist, cybersecurity
well,
checklist?
I think so. So there's quite a bit of that out there in the industry, right? So a lot of times vendors will provide it, right? Sometimes they're really some of the best places to go, and for actually because they build those products, right? And some of those recommendations you probably should take on board, right? Some of those things shouldn't always be suggestions, right? So you can get those kind of things. I think that's probably one of the places that I lean, fast. And there's obviously a lot of the industry accepted frameworks too that provide you a benchmark or kind of a checklist, if you will, to walk through, right? To be able to use to assess certain aspects of your program and kind of where you're doing well, where you're not doing so well, based on some of those maybe a maturity model, right? For a lack of a better way of putting it. So that stuff does exist out there on the internet. I mean, you'd be surprised a quick Google search will find you more research and more information than you probably know how to digest, because these things have already been thought of and created, right? So again, I would always lean into the frameworks because they're always a safe bet, right? Because they're so industry accepted, and when you start using those as a benchmark, you can't really go wrong. To really get a base of kind of where you're sitting. But talk to your vendors. They don't want you to have to claim a breach using their product, right? I mean, they want to make sure that you're doing it right. And a lot of them will go out of their way to help you actually discuss hardening and other things like that to be able to ensure that you're doing it properly, right? And or take considerations for your environment, right? Because every environment's different, right? No one works the same way.
All right. We have a second question here.
All right. I think, Ali, you mentioned, every company does business with third-party vendors. And so my question is around third-party vendors and supply chain security. With things like Log4j that's happened, how has that changed your rigor in terms of evaluating third-party vendors, as well as supply chain security?
Third-party vendors? Is that what the question is? How do you handle supply chain security? Is that kind of what you're asking? What we find at Galen is that when we get these things, they want to know how secure we are. But the questions are more penetrating and deeper than that, because now they want to know, who are you tied to? Are you using Amazon? Are you using GoDaddy? Are you using these people? They also want third-party risk assessments that provide evidence that we have vetted our third party that is now going to be third or fourth party to our customer. So there is an awful lot more emphasis on that now than, say, even as little as 2 years ago, I'm finding. One thing I want to add to what Doug said about her question about checklists, NIST has has a lot of documents that are free, and checklists are abundant there. Those are all free. You can download them by going to nist.gov. I use those. But again, remember that those things are starting points. When you complete your checklist, that tells you what your foundation is and not where you need to go, but it can certainly give you insight as to where you should go from there. So, and to the point about vendors providing it, they do. Be wary of vendor bias, because if they're doing it for their product, it's probably slanted a bit that way. I'm not saying that they're not high quality, they are. But just beware of vendor bias, because you're trying to solve your problem, not trying to solve a sale problem for them.
All right. We are almost out of time, so we can't go through the whole panel, but I want to ask two more people. Would you, now that we are through a major pandemic, would you do anything different to prepare for the next one that hopefully never comes, but I don't know how long it will take?
Sorry, Mario. So would I do anything different? The pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, and we have applied the majority of those lessons. So everything from resiliency, defense in depth, communication with our users better, making sure that we have plenty of spare laptops, by the way, in the closet. I mean, we have learned a lot of those lessons, and we have applied them. Would I do anything different? I don't think so, but I think that's mainly because we've learned the lessons. They're very fresh, and they're still being applied. So no, it's still good, but you know, we're still at the tail end of it. By the way, answering the other question that the guys answered, Nist cybersecurity framework. That's one of the best lists, I think, out there. It's got like 108 points. It helps you measure your maturity, and it's essentially a checklist of things you should be doing. So, and it applies pretty much to any organization cybersecurity program.
Awesome. Mario, last point?
Yes, so if there is something that I would consider doing based on a lot of the lessons learned, is get rid of all of the legacy systems. You know, I would like to see when we replace a legacy system, put a deadline, 1 year, 2 years, but do it. That's
100%.
And to answer her questions about checklists, this morning at the keynote, they mentioned the CSET part of CISA. I think that is a very good reference point, okay?
Okay, awesome. I can't go through all of you, but I first want to thank the panelists, so a round of applause, please. And also thanks to the audience for spending your valuable time with us. I hope you have something to take home. This is the cream de la cream, so these are the CISOs that do this every day. Please learn from our experience. Also thanks to ElevateIT and Casey Yarborough, who is hosting us here. And yeah, I appreciate your time. And by the way, I do a book sale, signing and selling here for a cheaper price, so please join me when you can. And we are ready here. Thank you very much.